The cocktail glasses clinked as my sister's perfectly manicured hand gestured wildly, her voice carrying across the upscale brunch spot where our family gathered every month. And then she shows up in this, I don't even know what to call it, some thrift store disaster. Madison's laughter echoed as our cousins joined in, their eyes darting to my simple button-down and jeans. I gripped my water glass tighter, forcing a smile while something cold and familiar settled in my chest. Family brunches had always been Madison's stage, but today's performance hit differently. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Classic Ellie. My mother chimed in with that particular sigh she reserved just for me. Always the practical one. Never understood the importance of presentation. I took a measured sip of water, letting the ice clink against my teeth. Practical. The word they always used when they meant plain, boring, forgettable. Madison flipped her caramel highlights over her shoulder, launching into another story about her glamorous job at Vertex Design, the hottest marketing firm in the city. My boss literally can't function without me, she gushed. Yesterday he called me while I was getting my nails done because he couldn't find the Henderson file. I had to talk him through the entire filing system I created. My brother-in-law, Kevin, scrolled through his phone, clearly having heard this routine before. Only my father seemed genuinely interested, nodding along with pride gleaming in his eyes. Madison had always been his golden child, the daughter who followed the expected path, who looked the part of success. How's the job hunt going, Ellie? My Aunt Vivian asked during a rare pause in Madison's monologue, her voice dripping with that special brand of family concern that feels more like an accusation. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me. Even Kevin looked up from his phone. It's going well, I said, butter knife slicing precisely through my avocado toast. I found something that suits me. Oh? Where? Madison leaned forward, perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. The table fell quiet, waiting for my answer. Just a small company. Nothing flashy like Vertex? I shrugged, watching disappointment flicker across their faces at my vague response. What's the title? My father pressed, that familiar crease appearing between his brows. Operations Management, I replied, taking another bite of my toast. Madison snorted into her mimosa. Operations Management? So what? Like overseeing the copy machines and ordering office supplies? The table erupted in sympathetic laughter. My mother patted my hand as if to console me for my mediocre career trajectory. Nothing wrong with starting somewhere, my father said, his tone making it clear that at 32, I should be well beyond starting somewhere. I could have told them then, could have mentioned that somewhere was actually Blackwood Innovations, the parent company that had quietly acquired Vertex Design 3 months ago. Could have explained that as executive director of acquisitions integration, I was technically Madison's boss's boss's boss, but I didn't. Some truths are better served cold. Instead, I smiled and asked Kevin about his golf game, watching relief wash over the table as attention shifted away from my supposed failure. Madison launched into another story about saving her department from disaster last week, and I nodded along, checking my watch discreetly. I'd perfected the art of invisibility in my family years ago. When Madison became homecoming queen, I was studying supply chain logistics. When she graduated with a marketing degree and landed a job through Dad's connections, I was working nights to pay for my MBA. When she bought her first house, with a generous down payment from our parents, I was living in a studio apartment, building my savings and making careful investments. For years, they'd interpreted my quiet path as lack of ambition, rather than a different kind of determination. Speaking of work, Madison's voice cut through my thoughts. We're doing this huge campaign for luminous skincare, probably getting bonuses this quarter. She turned to me with a razor-thin smile. Ellie, if you need help with your resume or interview skills, just ask. I know people. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced down to see our CEO's name flashing on the screen. "Excuse me," I said, standing. "I need to take this." I stepped outside onto the restaurant's terrace, leaving behind my sister's stage-whispered, "Probably her cat sitter," and the resulting chuckles. "James, what's up?" I answered, watching through the window as Madison mimed something that had the table in stitches again. "Ellie, sorry to bother you on Sunday, but the Vertex integration numbers just came in. Their management team is hemorrhaging money on that luminous campaign your sister mentioned at your last family dinner." I smiled at the irony. "Let me guess, the numbers don't justify the spend?" "Not even close. The ROI projections are fantasy, at best. We need to course correct before this quarter closes. How soon can you step in?" I watched Madison through the glass, animatedly describing what looked like the size of her office to our impressed relatives. The same relatives who'd been giving me pitying looks for years. "Tomorrow morning. I'll handle it personally." "That's why you're my right hand," James said. "Oh, and Ellie? Time to end the stealth mode. The board agrees. We need Vertex to know exactly who's calling the shots now." I ended the call and took a deep breath of spring air, allowing myself one small moment of satisfaction before returning to the table. "Everything okay?" my father asked as I slid back into my seat. "Just work," I said, reaching for my water. "Nothing important." "Probably someone's stapler jammed," Madison whispered to our cousin, loud enough for me to hear. I smiled, thinking about tomorrow morning when Madison would walk into an all-hands meeting and discover exactly what I did for a living. About how her face would look when she realized all those stories she'd been telling about saving the company were being evaluated by the very person she'd been mocking over brunch. "More mimosa, Ellie?" Madison offered, her condescension thinly veiled as generosity. "No, thanks," I said, checking my watch again. "I have some work to prepare for tomorrow. Big day." "On a Monday? Let me guess. Quarterly supply order?" She giggled. I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Something like that." As I collected my plain, practical purse, the one Madison had openly winced at when I arrived, I felt strangely calm. For years, I'd kept my success quiet, partly because I didn't need their validation, and partly because I knew how they'd react, with disbelief, then sudden, insincere pride. "I'll pick up the check," I said, pulling out my card. "Don't be silly," my father started to protest. "You should save your—" "I insist," I interrupted, handing my card to the waiter before anyone could object. Madison rolled her eyes at Kevin, that familiar "poor Ellie" expression crossing her face. "See you all next month?" I said, signing the receipt with a flourish that no one noticed. "And Madison, good luck with that luminous campaign. Sounds like you might need it." The confusion on her face was just a preview of tomorrow's revelation. As I walked out into the sunshine, my phone buzzed with another message. The details of tomorrow's meeting where I would be officially introduced to the Vertex team, including, of course, my sister. I slipped on my sunglasses and smiled. Sometimes success doesn't need an audience to be sweet. But occasionally, the audience makes it just a little bit sweeter. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that only comes with absolute certainty. I chose my outfit carefully, not to impress, but to establish presence. A charcoal suit that spoke of authority without shouting it. Minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a clean chignon. Nothing like the thrift store disasters Madison accused me of wearing. The Vertex office occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, all glass and chrome with their signature blue V logo prominently displayed in the reception area. I'd been here before, of course, but always after hours, reviewing their books without disturbing the creative process, as James had put it. Today was different. Today was about presence. "Good morning, Ms. Blackwood," the security guard greeted me, having been briefed on my arrival. The receptionist straightened immediately when I entered, her casual phone scrolling abandoned as she stood. "Ms. Blackwood, we weren't expecting you until the meeting. Can I get you anything? Coffee?" I'm fine, thank you, Claire, I replied, using her name deliberately. I'd memorized the names and positions of everyone at Vertex, from the C-suite to the maintenance staff. Knowledge is power, my father always said. One lesson from him I actually took to heart. I'd like to walk the floor before the announcement if you don't mind. Of course. Should I alert Mr. Davis that you're here? Mr. Davis, Madison's direct boss and the man she claimed couldn't function without her. No need. I know my way around. I walked through the open office space, nodding to puzzled employees who clearly wondered who this stranger was, moving with such confidence through their domain. Some were already gathered in small groups, whispering about the mysterious all-hands. Meeting called for 9 a.m. I spotted Madison at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, free hand gesturing dramatically as she spoke. Her workspace was exactly as I'd imagined. Photos of herself at company events, a small collection of industry awards, motivational quotes about boss babes, and crushing goals. She hadn't seen me yet. I moved to the conference room where the executive team was gathering, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't about humiliating Madison. This was business. The business of saving a failing division from their own marketing hubris. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small part of me looking forward to the moment when Madison realized that all this time, her practical sister had been building something while she'd been building an image. The conference room fell silent when I entered. 6 executives, including Paul Davis, Madison's boss, looked up from their pre-meeting chatter. "Gentlemen," I said, placing my portfolio on the table. "I believe we're scheduled for a company-wide announcement in 15 minutes, but I wanted us to speak privately first." Paul stepped forward, confusion evident on his face. "I'm sorry, you are—" I extended my hand. "Eleanor Blackwood, Executive Director of Acquisitions Integration at Blackwood Innovations, but you can call me Ellie." The color drained from Paul's face as he connected the dots. "Blackwood, as in, the company that acquired Vertex 3 months ago, yes." I smiled, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Shall we discuss the Luminous campaign before addressing the staff? I have some concerns about the numbers." As the executives scrambled to process this revelation, I caught a glimpse of Madison, through the glass wall, still at her desk, completely unaware that her world was about to tilt on its axis. I opened my portfolio and pulled out the Luminous campaign reports. Now, I understand creativity can't always be quantified, but ROI certainly can. Let's talk about reality versus expectations, shall we? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The executives' faces grew increasingly pallid as I walked them through the actual numbers versus what they'd been reporting. Not outright fraud, but certainly creative accounting that wouldn't hold. Up under proper scrutiny. "But the campaign is Madison's baby," Paul finally blurted out. "She assured us the metrics were solid." I raised an eyebrow. "Madison Carter? My sister?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your sister?" Paul repeated, eyes widening. "Yes," I confirmed, closing the portfolio. Which makes this conversation all the more important. I don't want anyone thinking nepotism works in either direction at Blackwood Innovations. My sister will be evaluated on her merits just like everyone else. I checked my watch. Now, shall we address the staff? I believe they're waiting. We walked to the town hall space where employees had gathered, murmuring in confusion. I spotted Madison in the second row, checking her makeup in her compact mirror, whispering to a colleague. She hadn't noticed me yet. Paul cleared his throat at the microphone, his voice slightly unsteady. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on. Short notice. I have an important announcement regarding the future of Vertex Design." He paused, gathering himself. 3 months ago, as some of you may have heard, Vertex was acquired by Blackwood Innovations. A ripple of concern moved through the crowd. Madison frowned, snapping her compact shut. Today, I'd like to introduce you to the Executive Director of Acquisitions Integration from Blackwood, who will be working closely with us during this transition period. Paul's eyes found Madison's in the crowd, a silent apology. Please welcome Eleanor Blackwood. I stepped to the microphone as the polite applause died down. Madison's head snapped up at the sound of my name, her expression freezing somewhere between disbelief and horror as our eyes met. Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. As Paul mentioned, I'm Eleanor Blackwood, but most people call me Ellie. Madison's mouth fell open. Her colleague nudged her, whispering something, but she didn't respond. Her eyes locked on mine. Blackwood. Innovations acquires companies with potential. Companies where we see value that perhaps isn't being fully realized. Vertex fits that description perfectly. I continued outlining the transition plan, explaining the evaluation process that would follow, but I could feel Madison's stare burning into me. When I finally finished and asked for questions, the room was silent until one brave soul raised their hand. Will there be layoffs? The question everyone fears during an acquisition. I noted Madison straightening in her seat, her hand unconsciously touching her designer necklace. Blackwood doesn't acquire companies to dismantle them, I assured them. We invest in potential. That said, we will be reviewing all operations, campaigns, and personnel to ensure alignment with our corporate values and performance expectations. My eyes met Madison's again. Merit and measurable impact will be our guiding principles, not appearances, or who can tell the best story at the conference table. The meeting concluded with nervous applause. As people filed out, Madison remained frozen in her seat, watching as executives approached me with forced smiles and firm handshakes. Finally, she stood and made her way toward me, her confident stride replaced by something more cautious. Ellie, she said, her voice stripped of its usual condescension. You work for Blackwood? I am Blackwood, I corrected her quietly. Or part of it, anyway. James Blackwood and I founded the company 7 years ago. He had the name and initial funding. I had the business plan and the drive. We've acquired 23 companies since then. Vertex is number 24. Madison's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her pallor. But you never said anything. All those brunches when we talked about work. When you talked about work, I corrected gently. I mostly listened. And yesterday when I said... She stopped, the memory of her mockery hanging between us. About my thrift store disaster outfit and operation management being about staplers, I supplied. Yes, I remember. Her eyes darted around, noting how the executives were watching our interaction. Ellie, I didn't mean... Madison, I interrupted, keeping my voice professional. We have a lot to discuss about the Luminous campaign. The numbers don't add up, and as the project lead, you'll need to explain the discrepancies. Shall we say 2 p.m. in the main conference room? She nodded mutely, the reality of her new situation sinking in. Good. And Madison? I added as I gathered my materials. Maybe leave the stories at brunch from now on. In this office, we prefer substance over performance. As I walked away, I heard her collapse back into her chair, the weight of years of dismissal and mockery finally landing squarely on her shoulders. I hadn't planned for my sister to learn about my success this way. In truth, I hadn't planned for her to learn about it at all. But as I stepped into what used to be the Vertex CEO's office, now temporarily mine during the integration, I realized that some lessons can only be learned through direct experience, and Madison was about to get quite an education. The temporary office felt eerily quiet after the chaos of the morning announcement. I traced my fingers along the polished mahogany desk that would be mine for the next 3 months of integration. Outside the glass walls, the Vertex creative team huddled in small clusters, casting furtive glances in my direction. News travels fast in open floor plans. My phone buzzed with a message from James. How's the nuclear fallout? I smiled despite myself. Radioactive. We'll brief you tonight. Precisely 1:58 p.m., there was a tentative knock on my door. Madison stood in the threshold, transformed from the woman who'd mocked my career choices over mimosas. Her confident posture had diminished, shoulders slightly hunched. The luminous campaign files clutched against her chest like a shield. "Come in," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Close the door." Madison slid into the seat, crossing her ankles the way our mother had taught us. Proper posture for proper ladies. Her eyes darted around the office, taking in the temporary nameplate, the family photo I'd placed on the desk. It was from my college graduation, the one she'd skipped for a Cancun trip with friends. "The luminous numbers," she said, sliding the folder across the desk. I opened it, scanning the pages I'd already reviewed 3 times. "These projections are ambitious." "They're realistic," she countered, a flash of her usual confidence returning. The engagement metrics from our soft launch showed 17% engagement on carefully selected test audiences doesn't translate to market-wide success, I interrupted. "You're projecting a 300% return based on preliminary data from hand-picked followers." Madison's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her knee. "That's industry-standard methodology." "It's creative accounting," I corrected. "And it's why Vertex has been losing money for the past 3 quarters despite all the glowing reports to the contrary." "We haven't been losing—" I slid a different file toward her. This one contained Blackwood's comprehensive financial analysis of Vertex's operations. Madison fell silent as she turned the pages, color draining from her face as she confronted the reality behind the glossy presentations she'd been part of. "This is why Vertex was vulnerable to acquisition," I explained quietly. "Appearances over substance, style over sustainability. The parallel to our personal dynamic hung unspoken. Between us." Madison closed the file, her composure cracking slightly. "Why didn't you ever tell me? About Blackwood? About what you were doing all these years?" I leaned back, considering the question that had been churning since yesterday's brunch. "Would you have believed me if I had?" Her silence was answer enough. "The luminous campaign needs to be reworked," I continued, returning to business. "Cut the budget by 40%, focus on measurable conversions instead of vanity metrics, and present a revised proposal by Friday." Madison nodded stiffly, gathering the files. As she reached the door, she paused. "Does Dad know about Blackwood?" "No," I replied. "No one in the family knows." "Why?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because success shouldn't have to be performed to be real." After she left, I turned to the window, watching the city sprawl beneath gray April clouds. This wasn't how I'd imagined today unfolding. In my mind, there would be satisfaction in Madison's realization, in the tables finally turning. Instead, I felt hollow, the victory tasteless. My phone rang. James checking in for an update. I filled him in on the meetings, the personnel evaluations, the restructuring plans. Professional, precise, practical, everything they'd always mocked me for being. "And your sister?" he asked carefully. James knew pieces of my family history, enough to understand today's complexity. "She'll adjust," I said. "Madison's always been adaptable." After hanging up, I pulled up the revised organization chart I'd been working on. Madison's name hovered in limbo, her position marked for evaluation pending. With a few keystrokes, I could eliminate her role entirely. Business justification was clear. Her department was underperforming, her campaign metrics inflated, her managerial skills unproven. My finger hovered over the keyboard. A light knock interrupted my thoughts. Paul Davis stood in the doorway, his earlier shock replaced by careful politeness. "Ms. Blackwood, do you have a moment?" I gestured him in, closing the org chart. "I wanted to apologize for the luminous situation," he began. "The projections were Madison's responsibility," I finished. "Interesting. In the quarterly reports, you personally signed off on those numbers." Paul's false contrition evaporated. She's your sister. I assumed you were looking for someone to blame. I'm looking for accountability, I corrected, which seems in short supply around here. With all due respect, Ms. Blackwood, your sister has been one of our most innovative minds. Her work may be ambitious, but ambitious isn't the problem. Dishonesty is. I pulled up the luminous numbers on my tablet. Madison presented inflated projections, but you approved them knowing they were fiction. The question is why? Paul's expression hardened. Vertex operates differently than Blackwood. We value creative vision over bean counting. Bean counting, I repeated softly. Interesting choice of words. I didn't mean you did, I interrupted. And that attitude explains why Vertex is now a Blackwood subsidiary instead of an industry leader. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. Be prepared to justify every line item in your department's budget tomorrow morning. Numbers, Mr. Davis, not narratives. After he left, I sat alone with the realization that Madison wasn't the architect of Vertex's problems. She was a symptom of a culture that valued appearance over substance. A culture that, in many ways, mirrored our families. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next 3 days passed in a blur of meetings, evaluations, and restructuring plans. I saw Madison only in passing, her usual animated presence replaced by focused determination as she reworked the luminous campaign. On Thursday evening, I found a revised proposal on my desk, the budget trimmed precisely as requested, the projections conservative rather than fantastical. I was reviewing it when my phone lit up with a family group text. Mom. Don't forget brunch. Sunday. Madison, bring those delicious pastries from the bakery near your office. Dad. Looking forward to hearing about that big campaign of yours, Madison. The familiar cadence of family expectations. I set the phone aside, returning to Madison's proposal. It was good. Better than good. Stripped of exaggeration, her creative instincts shone through with genuine insight. The kind of work that would actually succeed rather than just sound impressive at Sunday brunch. A soft knock at my open door pulled me from my thoughts. Madison stood there, different from the woman who'd commanded attention at brunch and different, still, from the shaken employee who'd entered this office days ago. Do you have a minute? She asked. I nodded, gesturing to the chair. I saw Mom's text, she said, settling into the seat. About Sunday brunch. Yes. Are you going to tell them? She asked, the question hanging between us. I closed her proposal. Tell them what? That I've been secretly building a company while they were busy praising your more visible accomplishments? That I now sign your paychecks? Madison flinched. When you put it that way, it sounds petty, I supplied. It would be if that were my intention. She studied me with new eyes. What is your intention, Ellie? With Vertex? With... She gestured. Vaguely between us. With all of this? I considered the question carefully. To build something meaningful. Something that lasts. And where do I fit into that? Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual performance. Are you going to fire me? The question I'd been asking myself all week. Should I? Madison looked down at her hands, manicure still perfect despite the chaos of her week. The luminous numbers were wrong. I knew they were too optimistic, but everyone kept pushing for better projections, more impressive metrics. Paul said that's how the game is played. Business isn't a game, I said, and you're better than that. Her head snapped up, surprise registering at what might have been the first genuine compliment I'd offered her in years. Your revised proposal, I continued, tapping the folder. It's good, honest, strategic. This is the work of someone who could actually help turn Vertex around. You're not firing me? I'm offering you a choice, I said. Continue as you were, creating impressive-sounding campaigns with little substance, or learn to build something real, something you don't have to exaggerate at family brunches. Madison was quiet for a long moment. Why would you give me that chance? After everything... The unfinished sentence encompassed years of dismissal, of condescension, of being the golden child while I was the practical disappointment. Because contrary to what our family believes, I understand the difference between appearance and value. I opened her proposal again. And there's value here, if you're willing to develop it properly. Madison looked at me with dawning understanding. That's why you never told them, isn't it? About Blackwood. You knew they'd suddenly change how they treated you. Yes, I acknowledged. And I didn't want approval I hadn't earned when I was struggling. Or admiration I didn't need once I succeeded. She nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective that was so fundamentally different from the validation-seeking she'd been raised to prioritize. We both had. I'll think about your offer, she said finally, standing to leave. At the door, she paused. About Sunday brunch. I'll be there, I said, as always. As Eleanor Blackwood, operations manager? There was a hint of a smile in her voice, not mocking this time, but something closer to understanding. Just as Ellie, I replied. That's always been enough, whether they recognized it or not. After she left, I turned back to the organizational chart I'd been avoiding all week. Madison's position, still hovering in evaluation limbo. With a few decisive keystrokes, I renamed it. Director of Creative Strategy, probationary. Not safe, not guaranteed, but a chance. Sometimes rebuilding a company isn't so different from rebuilding a relationship. Both require honesty, clear expectations, and the willingness to see value where others might miss it. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear. I dressed with my usual care, practical clothes, minimal makeup, but found myself adding a simple silver necklace James had given me after our first major acquisition, a small reminder to myself of what I'd built, visible or not. The restaurant was already buzzing when I arrived. Madison sat at our usual table, her posture different, less performance, more presence. Our parents hadn't arrived yet. She looked up as I approached, a tentative smile replacing her usual calculated charm. I got here early to save our table. Thanks, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. No Kevin today? We're taking some time apart, she said quietly. Turns out when you stop pretending everything's perfect, some people don't stick around. I nodded, understanding more than she realized. And the others? Running late. Dad's golf game went long. She fiddled with her water glass, then met my gaze directly. I've been thinking about your offer. And? I want to try. Building something real. Her voice gained confidence. I've spent so long trying to impress everyone that I'm not sure I even know what I'm actually good at anymore. But that proposal, the honest one, that felt different. Better. It was better, I confirmed. Because it was genuine. She took a deep breath. I also wanted to say I'm sorry. For the way I've treated you. For the things I've said. Not just last week, but for years. The apology hung between us, unexpected and unadorned. Before I could respond, our parents swept in, bringing their usual flurry of activity and expectations. There are my girls, Mom exclaimed, air-kissing us both before settling into her seat. Madison, how's that big campaign coming along? Your father's been telling everyone his daughter's revolutionizing the marketing industry. I watched Madison carefully, curious how she would respond. The old Madison would have embellished, exaggerated, performed. Instead, she smiled simply. It's been an educational week, actually. I've had to rethink my approach entirely. Dad's brow furrowed. Problems at work? Not problems, Madison said, glancing at me. Just new perspectives. Mom turned to me with her usual polite disinterest. And you, Ellie? How's your office management position? I took a sip of water, feeling Madison's eyes on me. It's operations management, Mom. And it's going well, thank you. Ellie's actually brilliant at what she does, Madison interjected, causing our parents to stare in surprise. She sees things others miss. Dad looked between us, sensing a shift he couldn't quite identify. Well, that's nice to hear. It's true, Madison continued. In fact, Ellie's been helping me rework my entire campaign strategy. Her insights have been invaluable. Our parents exchanged confused glances, unaccustomed to this dynamic between their daughters. Is that right? Dad asked, focusing on me with new curiosity. I didn't realize you knew anything about marketing, Ellie. I know. About sustainable business models, I replied evenly. Something every industry needs. Madison caught my eye across the table and smiled. A real smile. Not the practiced one she'd perfected for family photos and corporate headshots. I smiled back, realizing that perhaps the most valuable integration I'd oversee wouldn't be between companies, but between the fragments of our relationship, broken pieces finally being reassembled into something honest, something that might actually last. So, Mom said, still trying to process this new dynamic. Should we order? Madison, you usually get the avocado Benedict, right? Madison glanced at the menu with fresh eyes. Actually, I think I'll try something different today. As brunch continued, our parents kept trying to steer the conversation back to familiar patterns, praising Madison, offering me helpful suggestions for advancing my seemingly modest career. But something fundamental had shifted. Each time they attempted to elevate Madison at my expense, she gently redirected, occasionally looking to me with quiet acknowledgement. We didn't tell them about Blackwood, about Vertex, about our new professional relationship. Some truths aren't meant for performance. Some successes don't need an audience to matter. When the check arrived, my father reached for it automatically. I've got it, Madison and I said simultaneously, then looked at each other, in surprise. Let's split it, she suggested, a simple offer that somehow encompassed much more than a brunch bill. As we left the restaurant, Madison fell into step beside me while our parents walked ahead, already discussing next month's gathering. You never answered my question, she said quietly. About why you're giving me a second chance. I watched our parents walking away, still caught in the same patterns they'd always followed. Because change should be possible, I replied. Otherwise, what's the point of building anything new? Madison nodded slowly. I have a lot to learn. We all do, I said. Even executive directors of acquisition integration. For the first time, in years, perhaps ever, we shared a genuine laugh. Not at each other's expense, but at the absurdity of the personas we'd constructed and the expectations we'd tried to fulfill. So, Madison said as we approached our cars, see you tomorrow at the office, boss? I shook my head, smiling despite myself. See you tomorrow, Director of Creative Strategy. Don't be late. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Madison in my rearview mirror. She stood watching me go, no longer the golden child or the humbled employee, but something new. A sister, a colleague, a person in progress. Some might say success is best when shared. Others might argue it's sweetest when it proves others wrong. But as I headed home to prepare for another week of rebuilding Vertex, I was beginning to think that perhaps true success isn't about the validation or the vindication at all. Perhaps it's simply about creating something of value, whether anyone else recognizes it or not. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them. Out! And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.